Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest operation from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be performing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Just to set expectations up front, and will be repeated throughout this broadcast, this is a static fire test. A static fire test of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, meaning that we will not be counting down to a launch today. Rather, this is a demonstration of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. There will be a brief ignition and the 9 Merlin engines at the base. The Falcon 9 will fire for somewhere in the realm of between about 3 to perhaps as long as just shy of 10 seconds is typical for a SpaceX Falcon 9 static fire test. So once again, this will not be the launch of this particular Falcon 9 rocket, but just a pre-launch static fire test. So a nominal operation here would be to see those engines come alive, brief burn, and then they will cease firing. Taking a look at a brand new Falcon 9 booster here at the pad. This is B1085 in the SpaceX fleet. We'll talk a little bit more about exactly why this booster is being static fired now, and bring you some sound from NASA's manager of the Commercial Crew Program to help flesh that out. But before we do, want to mention, of course, the folks that we have on hand for today's static fire test operation. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast. Our Adam Bernstein is also out here preparing to, just keep eyes on the rocket, of course, managing the cameras outside of our office here. Michael Caine has the evening off, but he will be with us for our launch coverage tomorrow morning. You can follow the fellas on X, formerly Twitter. You can find Adam at ABurnNYC, Michael Caine at MD Caine Jr. While you're over there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. You can also find some of Adam's photos from earlier today from the arrival of the Polaris Dawn crew. That'll be the next human spaceflight mission leaving from the Cape. That mission set to launch in the pre-dawn hours no earlier than Monday, August 26th, so now less than a week from today. As you may have noticed, we currently don't have our countdown clock up on the screen, and that's because a static fire test, bit different than a standard launch for SpaceX. They don't publish the T0 time ahead of a static fire. By our estimation, they are counting down to a T0 ignition of about 7 o'clock tonight, so right about now, or in the next few seconds, we should be seeing the so-called big vent begin, and that'll give us a good visual indication that fueling is progressing along to that T0. And as we have not seen the big vent just yet, seems the ignition for the static fire is going to be happening a little bit after 7. Big vent happens as SpaceX is chilling the feed lines at the pad prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. It's a good visual time marker of where we are in the count. It comes up visually at about T-minus 20 minutes, 20 seconds. The process itself begins at T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, but we see the venting at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. As we're standing by for that, certainly want to thank the more than 1,400 of you who are joining with us live for this static fire test live coverage. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. It allows the YouTube algorithm to recognize the folks that are here and are engaged, brings more people into this live coverage. Also want to thank Callistia Lee, one of our wonderful moderators, for joining us this evening, helping to keep things kosher in the live chat. Appreciate you as always, Callistia. We're also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Pat Tully, Pasmaria H, Mark Otto, Toby Woby, James, Jude Torrey, Teresa Kamasis, or Cosmas, pardon me, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos, and of course the ability to watch all of our launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Good to see you this evening. See Butterfly and SG also joining with us tonight. Hope you're all doing well. Last but not least, if you have a comment or a question, and your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show, I'd love to bring you into the conversation about this or other happenings around the realm of space. You could do so by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we anticipate the static fire test of this Falcon 9 rocket, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is very much appreciated. And as we are awaiting this static fire test, want to briefly pop over to Pad 39A, perhaps a good omen for the Polaris Dawn crew, as we are seeing cresting over to that pad a fantastic looking rainbow. You can see illuminating the Starship Tower just to the right of the crew access tower at the pad. This will be where SpaceX is launching the Polaris Dawn mission a week from today. And as Mission Commander Jared Isaacman said, talking about the Polaris program writ large, the third flight in the program, which has yet to be publicly formally named, that'll be the first crewed mission of a Starship rocket. So perhaps a good omen for the crew, as they have arrived just several hours ago, touching down at the Space Florida Launch and Landing Facility, formerly the Space Shuttle Landing Facility. SpaceX Dragon spacecraft that will launch the Polaris Dawn mission has flown a couple of times before. It is Dragon Resilience. It launched the Crew 1 mission, the first operational flight of a Dragon spacecraft up to the ISS. And it also carried Jared Isaacman the last time he flew. That was on the Inspiration 4 mission in 2021. And as you can see, the big vent now beginning, so we have put up our countdown clock. We are approximately, as you can see, T-minus 20 minutes, 5 seconds and counting to, again, I will hammer this home throughout the broadcast, but this is a static fire test, So not a launch of this Falcon 9 rocket, but a brief ignition of the Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. We are approximately T-minus 18 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. Again, this is the so-called big vent, currently about halfway through its process right now at the pad, as the feed lines are being thermally conditioned ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load. This will be the final step in fueling that has yet to begin on the Falcon 9 rocket. This is anticipation of a static fire test of the vehicle, now less than 18 minutes away. This big vent will conclude in just about a minute, about T-minus 16 minutes, 30 seconds. Second stage LOX load begins T-minus 16 minutes. Want to thank channel member SG for a $3 super chat. Appreciate that, SG. And another channel member, Mark Otto, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Very much appreciated, Mark. Thanks to your generosity. And to our newest 10 channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Mark in the live chat if you haven't already. Now, approximately T-minus 16 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. You can see the big vent tapering off on time. As it subsides over the next couple of seconds here, we're now about 30 seconds away from the start of second stage LOX load. Currently T-minus 15 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. We've gone through a number of the countdown timeline events, but let's go ahead and get you caught up on what has happened and what is still in front of us. About T-minus 38 minutes was when the SpaceX launch director would have hit the call on the start of prop load ahead of the static fire. Fueling begins at T-minus 35 minutes, where they load RP1 or rocket grade kerosene on board Falcon 9's first and second stages. They also load liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's first stage. About a minute ago is when we started the most recent event on the timeline here, second stage liquid oxygen load, which is now in full swing. Coming up at T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines gets underway. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to the static fire here, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence begins. Starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up. Then the transporter erector, the strong back, will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It'll stay in that position as we get into the static fire. About 3 minutes prior to the static fire test ignition, first stage liquid oxygen tank will be full. Same will be true at about T-minus 2 minutes on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director at this point would give their go for launch. However, again, this is not a launch. This is a static fire test. So they will give their go to the final proceeding with that. T-minus 3 seconds, the engine ignition command will be issued. And again, this is a static fire test, not a launch, so the hold down clamps will not release the Falcon 9, barring some catastrophic anomaly, which, knock on wood, we will not witness today. And again, there will be a brief, roughly 3 to shy of 10-second burn of the 9 Merlin 1D engines. SpaceX again will of course go through all of the data from today's static fire test following the conclusion of that ignition, and they will target the launch of the Starlink 10-5 mission, currently set to lift off from this pad no earlier than tomorrow morning. That is Tuesday, August 20th. 4-hour launch window opens at 5:20 a.m. So that is the earliest possible time that we'll see a launch tomorrow. However, once the static fire test is concluded and SpaceX has run through the data, they will likely give us a more concise update on the planned T0 time at that time. Now T-minus 11 minutes, 53 seconds and counting. We're currently T-minus 10 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. I want to thank the more than 2,200 of you who are joining with us live for this static fire test coming up fairly soon. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us to allow some more folks to find their way into our live static fire test coverage. I want to turn to now more of the reason for why we are here on this static fire test day. Day, of course, busy for SpaceX, welcoming in the Polaris Dawn crew and making preparations for that launch coming up in a week. The reason for this static fire test actually has to do with another crew launch, however, not Polaris Dawn, talking about Crew 9. This particular first stage booster that you see here on your screen, tail number B1085 in the SpaceX fleet, was designated for the Crew 9 mission. However, there was a bit of, as it was described, water intrusion that happened during the transportation of the booster from SpaceX's McGregor, Texas testing facilities out here to the Cape. So go ahead and let's listen into part of an explanation from that from NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch, as described during an August 7th briefing. Overall briefing was discussing International Space Station operations, and during the Q&A he was asked about the readiness of this booster, which was first alluded to back during a Crew 9 briefing in late July. So this is the voice of Steve Stitch of NASA's Commercial Crew Program.
Relative to Falcon 9 first stage water intrusion, there was some moisture that went into the fuel in the LOX tank of that booster when it was transported from McGregor to the Cape. The desiccant system didn't perform the way it was supposed to. That desiccant system is supposed to keep that air dry, and so it didn't perform the way it was supposed to, so we had to dry those tanks out and then replace a few components on the vehicle. And so getting a shakedown flight of that on a Starlink would be helpful for us. That's just kind of a side benefit of moving from August to September.
And again, that was, as you saw at the bottom of the screen, the voice of NASA's Steve Stitch, the manager of the Commercial Crew Program for NASA. That move he was referencing, the Crew 9 mission at one point was targeting no earlier than mid-August of 2024, now no earlier than September 24th of this year. Reason being connecting back to the Boeing Starliner crew flight test, which is still ongoing. Starliner still docked to the International Space Station as we speak. Potentially as early as late this week, NASA may make a determination on how to conclude the Starliner CFT operation. There are essentially two main paths that they could go down. Either the crew being NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, would either return home on the Starliner spacecraft as originally intended, or the alternative option is the SpaceX Dragon that will launch the Crew 9 mission will launch with only 2 members on board, following the undocking of an uncrewed Starliner spacecraft, which would land in the southwest United States, freeing up the forward port for the Crew 9 Dragon to launch and dock with that port of the International Space Station, after which Butch and Sonny would then become a part more completely of Expedition 72, remain on station until the conclusion of the Crew 9 mission, and then return with the 2 members of Crew 9 who launch, and that would be in February, the earliest of 2025. So, in essence, it would extend Butch and Sonny's time on station to an 8-month mission. Again, no decision has been made as far as that is concerned, but that is still something that's in the loop, and that was part of the reason why the Crew 9 mission is now launching in September. Also launching from the pad you see here on your screen, Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It'll mark the first time that a crewed flight lifts off from this particular pad, supported by the still relatively new Crew Access Tower. And lastly, shuffling from August to September allows NASA and SpaceX time to complete the certification for a crewed mission from this tower. And it has the additional benefit of clearing space out from pad 39A to allow SpaceX to turn that pad over from a Falcon 9 configuration to a Falcon Heavy to support NASA's Europa Clipper mission. So lots of moving parts here with lots of missions, but back in essence, the reason why we're here, water intrusion on the Falcon 9 first stage booster in the LOX tank. They have remedied that, and SpaceX is going to, as Steve Stitch put it, perform a shakeout mission when it launches the Starlink 10-5 operation no earlier than tomorrow morning. We're now T-minus 4 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. At this point, the transporter erector, the strong back, will be reclining about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Because this is a relatively clear night, if you keep your eyes really closely in tune with the shadows of the truss of the transporter erector being cast on the booster, you may see the shadows shift, showing that the booster is reclining back about 1.5 degrees away. Won't be terribly dramatic, but might be able to notice that shift happening there. We're now T-minus 3 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. About 30 seconds away from the first stage liquid oxygen tank being completely full. taking a look at the live chat. I want to thank the now more than close to 4,000 of you who are joining with us live. If you just happen to pop in with us, you're watching our live coverage of SpaceX's static fire test of its Falcon 9 rocket, which is coming up in approximately 3 minutes from now. Again, this is a static fire test, not a launch of the Falcon 9 rocket, but an important test ahead of the Starlink mission set for tomorrow morning. This particular Falcon 9 first stage booster, if you happen to miss our explanation, it will also be used to launch the Crew 9 mission, which nominally will carry 3 NASA astronauts and 1 cosmonaut from Roscosmos up to the International Space Station. As you can see, the transporter rector has reclined back. The shadows have shifted, and you can actually see the TE now shifted a little bit away from the Falcon 9 rocket in between the booster and the crew access tower. Now T-minus 2 minutes and counting. At this point, the Falcon 9 should be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Coming up shortly, we'll be seeing the ground gas closeouts. As you can see, they're beginning. In about 30 seconds, the vehicle will enter its startup point. It's when the control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the onboard flight computers, and the tanks are pressurized. Now less than a minute to the static fire. Right about now is when the SpaceX launch director would give that go-ahead for ignition coming up in about 40 seconds. Again, this is an approximate time to ignition, so bear with us. We'll be watching in together as SpaceX does not provide mission audio for a static fire test. Let's go ahead and focus in as we're now approximately 20 seconds away from ignition. Roughly 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. And it looks like we have conclusion of the static fire test. Might be able to hear a little bit of the rumble from those Merlin engines as the sound reaches us. Let's listen in. Might not be too much of a vibrato out here as the wind is pushing away from us, so the elements may work against us for that extra effect. But by all visual accounts, it appears, and I will stress, appears to be a good static fire test of the Falcon 9 rocket. As SpaceX gathers data from this brief ignition, they will begin to safe the vehicle and drain the remaining propellant. You can see still quite a bit of vapor around the vehicle, that super cold liquid oxygen still within the Falcon 9 first stage. Again, once SpaceX has had an opportunity to review the data from this static fire test, then they will publish the T0 liftoff time of the mission that this Falcon 9 is set to launch coming up tomorrow morning. That is Starlink 10-5, a batch of likely 23 Starlink satellites on board, though SpaceX will clarify and specify that once it's ready to announce its formal targeted T0. And with the action behind us here for the static fire test, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our live coverage this evening. Appreciate those of you who were with us today and hope you're able to rise and shine early with us tomorrow for the launch of the Starlink 10-5 mission. That live coverage will begin about an hour prior to liftoff tomorrow. Be sure to check out our website, spaceflightnow.com. Pop over to the launch schedule tab for the very latest on the T0 liftoff time of this Falcon 9 rocket. You can also follow us on our social channels, X, formerly known as Twitter. We'll have updates for you there as well. I want to thank Callistia Lee for helping us out with a live chat today, and our thanks to folks behind the scenes, Adam Bernstein setting up the cameras outside, making sure we had good clear views of the Falcon 9, and to Stephen Young for running the technical operations of the broadcast. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you back here when it's launch time, folks, and until then, bye-bye.